The House will please come to order. Good morning, members. We are pleased to have Reverend Veit from St. Mark's Episcopal Church here with us today. You please join him and as he opens our sixth day of the 66th Wyoming Legislature, House of Representatives. Reverend Veit.
Good morning. I'd like to start off this week with a prayer for our state government, a collect for our government. Let us pray. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, send down upon those who hold office in this state, especially this House of Representatives, the spirit of wisdom, charity, and justice, that with steadfast purpose they may faithfully serve in their offices to promote the well-being of all people, especially those here in Wyoming. Today we especially pray for those that may be ill and are in need of some recovery and healing. We keep them in our thoughts and prayers. For it is in your name that we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Veit. We look forward to your continued presence with us the rest of the week. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Convening roll for the sixth day, Monday, February 21st, 2022. Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Excused. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flittner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Jennings. Kinner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. LeBeau. McGuire. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. Excused. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Romero Martinez. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. I'll go through here again.
So we'll keep the roll open. We have our Labor Health Committee that's still out doing work, so we appreciate that. I know there's several privileges of the floor. I'm going to start with Representative Simpson. Has a couple introductions to make. Representative Simpson, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, it's a pleasure to introduce to you our pages for this coming week. Two Star Valley young men that are here to serve you. You remember Brian from 2 years ago. He and his brother served as a page, so you'll recognize him. Brian's an accomplished musician. He runs cross-country track, and he's a junior. He's home-taught, homeschooled by a very talented mother. New to us is Preston Bueller. Preston's a senior at Star Valley High School. He's also a talented musician, and he runs cross-country as well. He's also a student body officer at Star Valley High School. They're at your disposal. Anything short of sending them downtown after a hamburger or something like that, please feel free to use them as pages. They're looking forward to the experience.
Welcome to the House. So, Representative Simpson, I thought the burger was the first order of business. I mean, they're distance runners, right? They're distance runners, so, okay. Representative Nyman, then I have Representative Stivar, and then I have, well, we'll just keep going. Representative Nyman, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to have a privilege of the floor, sir.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize first some family up here from down in Colorado, actually. This is my niece, Brittany, and my twin nephews, Malachi and Jude. They're coming down to see how legislation works. So.
Welcome. Welcome to all of you.
Oh, you don't, I see. And one other one, I would also like to
Please.
recognize some extremely important people from Weston 7. I have with me today my local school board from Weston County 7. If you folks would stand up, that is Roxy Taft, our business manager. I have Ty Miller. I have Curtis Rankin. I have Mark Mitchell. And I also have Diana White. Those are the trustees of the Weston 7 School Board, probably the most important board we ever elect in this state. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Welcome, Weston 7. I actually know some of you quite well, so great to see you here. Representative Stivar, privilege, please proceed.
To the floor.
Please.
Speaker. If you'd turn around the back, would old Representative Lars Lone stand up? He's the reason I'm here. When he moved out of district, I got his job, so let's give him a hand.
Welcome, Representative Lone. Great to see you. I wouldn't have recognized you from here. Must be the plaid and not the suit. Good to see you. More privileges. Do I see Representative Schwartz in the back at a microphone?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the north balcony, it is my privilege to introduce our county clerk, who was appointed midterm and has done an outstanding job for us in a short period of time, particularly having to jump into redistricting. Mo Murphy, please.
Welcome. Welcome, Clerk Murphy. I know there's many clerks here. I see Representative Ayer up to introduce somebody. Please proceed, Representative Ayer.
Privilege of the floor, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I've been told that our county clerk from Uintah County, it's not often we have people come from our corner of the state, but I'd like to introduce Amanda Hutchinson, the best county clerk in the state.
Thank you. At least the best one in Uintah County, I'm sure that's true. Representative Kinner,
Privilege of the floor,
Please
please.
proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, it is School Boards Day, and I see representatives from Sheridan County up there. Representing School District Number 3 is Misty, and then representing School District Number 2 is Shane. Welcome.
Welcome. Representative McGuire in the back, then to Representative Williams here, and then to Larson. Representative McGuire, nothing? There's no one in the audience from Natrona County today, huh? Representative Williams,
Privilege of the floor.
please proceed.
Thank you. In the North Gallery, I recognize County Commissioners from Niobrara County, Pat Wade and Elaine Griffith.
Welcome. Welcome to the House. Now, Representative Larson Lloyd,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Privilege, please.
please proceed.
We'd like to welcome Dr. Brad Tyndall with us today, who is president of Central Wyoming College and Lander and takes care of that region in my county and the county where up near the great mountains on the western side of the state. So Brad, we're thankful that we appreciate you being here.
Welcome. All right, for anybody in the gallery who didn't get introduced, we welcome you too. So thank you. Because to be fair, sometimes you're up there and we don't recognize you or see you or didn't get a note sent in. So we do appreciate you being here, just like we appreciate all those who may be watching us online. And as a reminder to the members of the body, we are online, and some of us may have a following online. Some may have a following for different reasons than others. So let's actually be attentive to what we do and what we say, whether we're at the microphone or not. If you are behind the person who is speaking and in the field of view, your actions may be being presented to the rest of the world. I particularly would suggest the folks that use the back two microphones, while someone is using those microphones, if you're behind, including on the bench outside of the bar, that you are likely in the field of vision of the camera. So I've been told that there are some folks that have been observed, and some of you may have, like I said, fan clubs, or some of them may not be so fanny. There you go. Just a fair warning. All right. Got several announcements here. Members, if you traveled home, as you know, you're entitled to receive mileage. Ms. Heather down at the LSO office has the sheet you can sign. And I don't want to rush up here right now, but on the front desk, right next to John, there are both resolutions, both the one for Senator Christensen and the one for Ryan, who saved the family, the mother and child in Rock Springs. So if you haven't signed those, please let's try to finish up those signings. So one, Mr. Christensen, Senator Christensen, is going to be taken to his service on this coming Saturday by members who will be attending that. On that note, if there are folks who are not able to attend but are going to be in Cheyenne, our LSO is willing to set up a room so people that wanted to come and just observe the service online could attend that. And so if folks are interested, please let Pam know so we can kind of get a head count. We make sure we have enough room, have a room that has enough room. If there's a half a dozen, we'll probably do it Supreme Court room. If there's 50 or 60 that decide they want to come in with their families and just watch the service for Senator Christensen, we may look for another venue. So if you're interested in a kind of a viewing by members of the legislature and your family or guests, please let Pam know so she can kind of keep a running tally over the next couple of days so we kind of know where to set that up. With that, Journal Committee report. So we're still missing our Labor Health Committee. All right, so we're going to close out our roll, knowing that I'm going to excuse the entirety of the Labor Health Committee as they are not here. So please, let's finish out the roll.
Connolly. Flitner. Fortner. Allanan. LeBeau. Ottman. Romero Martinez. Worf. Wilson. Mr. Speaker, 48 present, 12 excused.
Thank you very much. So just for the public, because the responses and my excusing members was not maybe could not be heard. We have a committee that's still out. So that's the Labor Health Committee. That's 9 members. We have 3 members who are not here because they did not either feel well or have, and we have another member who had a family emergency and is not going to be here at least for a day or 2. So 4 members are out for either health, well, all health purposes, 3 of them members that have health concerns, and 1 who has a family member that has a health concern. So let's keep those folks in our prayers. And as you might have noticed, I asked Reverend Veit to help us with that, with his prayer. So with that, we'll get underway with our business. Journal Committee report.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of February 18th, 2022 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Haroldson and Provenza.
So now that order of business of introduction, reading, and reference of bills. Members, we're going to introduce first the House, the budget bill, House Bill 1, and then I'm going to introduce some Senate files that we want to keep moving in the process. So House Bill, the first bill is House Bill 1. Reading clerk.
House Bill 1, sponsored by Appropriations.
First reading of the bill.
General Government Appropriations 2.
Pursuant to Joint Rule 4-1-2, House Bill 1 is referred to Committee of the Whole. We're now at that order of business of Senate files on first reading. First Senate file for consideration. Senate File 2.
Senate File 2, sponsored by Management Council.
First reading of the bill.
Legislative Budget.
Senate File 2 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. Next bill for our consideration is 39.
Senate File 39, sponsored by Appropriations.
First reading of the bill.
Fireman's Pension Plan Benefits.
Senate File 39 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. Next bill for our consideration is 66.
Senate File 66, sponsored by Appropriations.
First reading of the bill.
American Rescue Plan Act Recovery Funds Appropriations.
Senate File 66 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. Next bill for our consideration is Senate File 67.
Senate File 67, sponsored by Appropriations.
First reading of the bill.
State-funded capital construction.
Senate File 67 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. So members, as you know, when we go into general file today, we'll be considering the budget bill. That is the one bill, as I just referred from our rules, that can go straight to Committee of the Whole. It does not need to go through a committee. It comes straight to Committee of the Whole as a mere bill. The Senate, our Senate colleagues are doing the same thing. Those other bills, as you might have heard, are also very appropriation-centric, and we want to keep them moving. Our Senate colleagues are doing the same thing with the redistricting bill. They are introducing it today and getting it in the process. So that is, that's what we're trying to accomplish today. Reports from standing committees.
House Bill 55, sponsored by Representative Walters. Liquor license, airport exemptions, an act relating to alcoholic beverages. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom is referred House Bill 55, liquor licenses, airport exemption. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendment. Ayes. Representatives Blackburn, Burt, Clausen, Duncan, LeBeau, McGuire, Roscoe, Swanitzer. Noes. Representative Ayer. Representative Swanitzer, Chairman. House Bill 125, sponsored by Representative Connolly. Workplace Injury Assistance, Information, and Guidance, an act relating to labor and employment. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, to whom is referred House Bill 125, Workplace Injury Assistance, Information, and Guidance. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Baer, Burkhart, Duncan, Ayer, Gray, Greer, Heiner, Sherwood, Western. Representative Greer, Chairman. House Bill 117, sponsored by Representative Kenner. Occupational Therapy Licensure Compact, an act relating to professions and occupations. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred House Bill 117, Occupational Therapy Licensure Compact. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Connolly, Flitner, Hallinan, LeBeau, Ottman, Wilson. Noes. Representatives Stivar, Wharf. Excused. Representative Romero Martinez. Representative Wilson, Chairman.
All right, members, we're on that order of bills on second reading. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 37.
House Bill 37, sponsored by Judiciary, Juvenile Justice Data Reporting, an act relating to criminal history records.
House Bill 37 having been read two separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Joint Resolution 6.
House Joint Resolution 6, sponsored by Capital Financing, Common School Account, Investments and Distributions, a joint resolution proposing to amend the Wyoming Constitution to modify and modernize the Common School Account within the Permanent Land Fund.
House Joint Resolution 5 having been read two separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? House Joint Resolution 6 was just read, actually. Having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next one is House Joint Resolution 5.
House Joint Resolution 5, sponsored by Capital Financing, Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, Investments and Distributions. A joint resolution proposing to amend the Wyoming Constitution to modify and modernize the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund.
House Joint Resolution 5, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Mr. Majority Floor Leader. My apologies, there is no consent list, so we're at that order of business of bills on third reading and final passage. First bill for our consideration is House Bill 9.
House Bill 9, sponsored by Select Tribal, Economic Development Programs, Tribal Inclusion, an act relating to the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
House Bill 9, having been read three separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew, Baker, Banks, Bear, Blackburn excused, Brown, Burkhart, Burt, Clausen excused, Connolly, Crago, Duncan, Eklund, Ayer, Flitner, Fortner, Gray, Greer, Hallinan, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Jennings, Kenner, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson Dan, LeBeau, McGuire, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller excused. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Romero Martinez. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood excused. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 51 aye, 5 no, 4 excused.
House Bill 9, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 9 has passed the House. Thus, House Bill is 29.
House Bill 29, sponsored by Education. Hathaway Scholarship Amendments, an act relating to the Hathaway Scholarship Program being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
House Bill 29, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn excused. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen excused. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Ayer. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. LeBeau. McGuire. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller excused. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Romero Martinez. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood excused. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 44 aye, 12 no, 4 excused.
House Bill 29, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 29 has passed the House. Next bill, House Bill 30.
House Bill 30, sponsored by Education. School Finance, Increasing Cash Reserves, an act relating to school finance being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
House Bill 30, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn excused. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen excused. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Ayer. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. LeBeau. McGuire. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller excused. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Romero Martinez. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood excused. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 46 aye, 10 no, 4 excused.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 30 has passed the House. Next bill for consideration, House Bill 43.
House Bill 43, sponsored by Travel, Trophy Game, Big Game, and Wild Bison License Allocations. An act relating to game and fish, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We have two amendments. The first one was Summers. The second one is delete the enacting clause, be Winter. So we'll take amendment number 1. Representative Summers, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I'd move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 43 and ask for your favorable consideration. So, ladies and gentlemen, all this amendment does is so we're in this bill, we're moving from 2-90-10, basically 90% resident, 10% non-resident. The starting point is a little different for each species. So what this does is just say we're going to phase that in over 5 years. And the reason I'm bringing that, I'll be full honesty, I got a moose outfitter in my area that's really dependent upon this. He's got a lot of guys that have a lot of points. And I just think it's an easier way to break them in during a period of time. Having served on the Wildlife Task Force, to also be straight up with you, we never talked about this amendment. So I'm not representing this as something that task force has gone over, but I think it's just a way to ease this in for outfitters that are highly impacted.
Thank you, members. We're on third reading, so it's the introduction, 1 first times, and then second times. Chairman Flitner for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And if the good bringer of the amendment could just explain to me what a phase-in might look like. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? Any other members for their first time? First time on the amendment. First time. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, it's your second time. Oh, wait, I got someone that got to the mic. So
First for a second.
all right, anybody for their second time? Anybody for their second time? Representative Sweeney. All right. Anybody else for their second time, or you're done with first times for second times? Anybody for the second time? Saying none. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And because the percentages start out different, the way I thought was easiest for the body to understand was just to do so, and you'll read it on line 7 of the amendment, shall do so in a proportionally equal manner. So if you were going from an 80-20 to a 90-10, it would be a 5% move every year. But if you started with a 25-75, it would be a little different. And so it really depends on the species. That's why I wanted to leave it to the Game and Fish to make that adjustment.
So members, we are voting on third reading amendment number 1, House Bill 43. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. Division being called for. All those in favor of the amendment, please stand. All those opposed, less than 42. Trust me, folks, the amendment is adopted. The amendment is adopted. Next amendment for consideration is third reading amendment number 2, Representative Winter. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 43 and ask for your favorable consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to approach this from maybe a different angle than what we've talked about in the past. The state of Wyoming really is, well, we need non-resident people in this state. The tourism is so important to this state, and it was the other day during the discussion, I don't believe the correct figures were alluded to as far as the tourism industry goes. The outfitting industry and non-residents supply over $330 million a year to the tourism economy. And I just wanted you to know that, and hopefully you'll reconsider that this bill. We do not need it. There's outfitters that are really dependent upon this, and they bring a lot of money into these small communities, especially this moose and sheep hunters. They are really dependent on the outfitting industry to keep their economy going. So I would ask that you vote against this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Winter. Any other member for their first, this is members for their first time. Members for their first time.
I bet you would.
Representative Jennings, please proceed for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm also going to urge a no vote on this. I've been supportive of this notion all the way along, but with the removal of the amendment the other day, I think it gives a perception that we really don't want to give to the people of Wyoming. It presents a picture that that maybe if you have money, you get special privileges. So on and against, for the amendment, against the bill.
Thank you very much. Chairman Flitner for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and with all due respect to the bringer of the amendment, I just would remind the body that the reason for the bill was that we were trying to solve two problems: a scarcity of resource and an increased demand for those particular species. So it was an effort to try to solve that problem and also improve the drawing odds of resident hunters. There is no dispute that outfitting does provide a tremendous impact to our economy. But the outfitting business did testify to our wildlife task force that with regard to these particular species, resident hunters do prove to be just as, they use their outfitters just as much as the non-residents do. There are some exceptions, of course, in certain pockets of the state where, yes, of course, this will be an impact. But even that outfitter testified that 99% of the people that hired him to outfit for these species, or at least for sheep, were resident hunters. So I respect where you're coming from, and I do understand that this will have an impact. But I think because we are trying to solve these problems, the task force felt this was the best way to go about it. And it is my hope that eventually the losses that might be incurred by those outfitters, particularly those who outfit for moose, will make that deficit will be made up with our resident hunters. Thank you, and I would urge your no vote.
Thank you very much. Representative Haroldson for your first time. Third reading amendment number 2, House Bill 43. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I want to address two things that I heard. The first is the concept that that money gets you privileges, and that is an issue in this bill, you guys. Legitimately an issue. We don't ever want to make it a point where we realize that finances get you a different place when it comes to the regulations or the issuing of tags. We want these super tags, these tags to be able to be used for advancing wildlife management. I think that's a great thing, but we need to make sure that's addressed. Now, the committee told me, the committee that works for our wildlife regulatory agency, they said this is going to be an interim topic that they will address. And so to everyone on that committee who's listening, address the issue so we can continue making this a better deal. Because if we go into next year, there's going to have to be something that will be adjusted or changed so that we eliminate this money gets you a position situation. Along the lines of the 90-10 concepts, this is bringing us into alignment with all the states around us. And I understand, I feel sorry for someone who has been waiting their whole life to get this, and they're like, man, why are you bringing this legislation now? We have this slow start concept where we're going to grab 5% or so a year, so that's going to help that. But at the end of the day, why should we be sitting in a position where all the other states around us are not, and that is with a lopsided private or out-of-state to in-state number. So I believe we need to move forward with the 90-10. I believe it's an intelligent choice, and the commission's going to fix our other issue. And so I believe that if we can do those two things, I think this is really good legislation and we can move forward with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Representative Washut, for your first time,
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I spoke to one of the largest outfitters in the state, and he told me they had no objection at all to this bill. So I would encourage a no vote on the amendment and for the bill.
Thank you. Any other members for your first time? First time, House Bill 43. House Bill 43, Amendment Number 2, third reading, Amendment Number 2. Any other member for their first time? First time to second time. Second time to the sponsor, Representative Winter. And Representative Winter, please, you have all the time you want to explain your position, and then would you please withdraw the amendment at the end? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regard to some of the comments, politics has gotten into this whole thing, and it's a sad deal, but the non-resident that's been putting in for these preference points for years are going to be, they're going to blame the state of Wyoming big time, and I hate to see it happen. Our tourism industry is so important to this state, and I don't believe this is going to do any good, at least for the outfitters. It's not, and the amount of money that comes into the coffers of Wyoming is tremendous, and we need every bit we can come up with, whether it's resident, non-resident, or whatever. But just remember that this is Wyoming. It's not Colorado, Utah, Idaho, anybody else. It is Wyoming, and we do things the right way as far as wildlife goes. So I hope you'll vote in favor of the amendment and no on the bill. Thank you. And I withdraw the amendment.
Thank you, Representative. We appreciate you. So members, House Bill 43, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn excused. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen excused. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Ayer. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. LeBeau. McGuire. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller excused. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Romero Martinez. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood excused. Simpson. Summers. Stiff. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters, Washit, Western, Wharf, Williams, Wilson, Winter, Yin, Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker, Nicholas. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Larson Lloyd? Aye to no. Nicholas on House Bill 43? From excused to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Larson Lloyd, did you want to change? So you are an aye? Thank you. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 45 aye, 11 no, 4 excused.
House Bill 43, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 43 has passed the House. Next House Bill is 45.
House Bill 45, sponsored by Minerals, Mine Reclamation Bonding, Voluntary Assigned Trusts, an act relating to environmental quality, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
House Bill 45, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew, Baker, Banks, Bear, Blackburn excused, Brown, Burkhart, Burt, Clausen excused, Connolly, Crago, Duncan, Eklund, Ayer, Flitner, Fortner, Gray, Greer, Hallinan, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Jennings, Kenner, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson Dan, LeBeau, McGuire, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Oakley, Obermuller excused, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Paxton, Provenza, Rodriguez Williams, Romero Martinez, Roscoe, Schwartz, Sherwood excused, Simpson, Summers, Stith, Stivar, Sweeney, Walters, Washit, Western, Wharf, Williams, Wilson, Winter, Yin, Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 56 aye, 4 excused.
House Bill 45, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 45 has passed the House. Next bill, House Bill 46.
House Bill 46, sponsored by Minerals, Partnership Challenge Loan Program Amendments, an act relating to the Wyoming Economic Development Act being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
House Bill 46, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew, Baker, Banks, Bear, Blackburn excused, Brown, Burkhart, Burt, Clausen excused, Connolly, Crago, Duncan, Eklund, Ayer, Flitner, Fortner, Gray, Greer, Hallinan, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Jennings, Kenner, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson Dan, LeBeau, McGuire, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Oakley, Obermuller excused, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Paxton, Provenza, Rodriguez Williams, Romero Martinez, Roscoe, Schwartz, Sherwood excused, Simpson, Summers, Stith, Stivar, Sweeney, Walters, Washit, Western, Wharf, Williams, Wilson, Winter, Winter? Yin. Zwanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Larson Dan, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Haroldson, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 44 aye, 12 no, 4 excused.
House Bill 46, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 46 has passed the House. Next bill is House Bill 79.
House Bill 79, sponsored by Appropriations, Employment Support Fund Amendments, an act relating to unemployment compensation, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
House Bill 79, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn excused. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen excused. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Ayer. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. LeBeau. McGuire. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller excused. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Romero Martinez. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood excused. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zwanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Burt, no to aye. Heiner, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 37 aye, 19 no, 4 excused.
House Bill 79, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 79 has passed the House. Next bill, House Bill 80.
House Bill 80, sponsored by Corporations, Campaign Reports Amendments, an act relating to campaign reports, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
House Bill 80, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn excused. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen excused. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Ayer. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. LeBeau. McGuire. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller excused. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Romero Martinez. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood excused. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zwanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 41 aye, 15 no, 4 excused.
House Bill 80, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 80 has passed the House. All right, Chief Clerk's off the floor for just a minute, taking care of something, so just stand at ease for just a moment. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House resolve itself into committee of the whole to consider only the budget bill, House Bill 1.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, no. Representative Duncan.
The committee of the whole will please come to order. The reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 1, sponsored by Appropriations. General Government Appropriations 2, an act to make appropriations for the fiscal biennium commencing July 1st, 2022, and ending June 30th, 2024.
Chairman Nicholas? Oh.
So good morning, everybody. So we're taken a little bit by surprise. We thought we were going to start at 2 o'clock, and so I'm out there running around getting coffee and getting ready. So just some quick introductory remarks to kind of fill out the big picture. And I also wanted to provide you some information as we start talking about numbers. So in your box, you'll see a handout with, there's about 10 or 12 pages to it. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but there are, basically the first couple pages are important numbers about our budget versus the governor's budget, total amount of dollars available. In the back of it, there's an explanation of ARPA dollars and what is what and how that's going to work. Then you'll see some graphs that have to do with our current finances and our funding for the general fund and our trending, where we've been in the past and where we're trending to, and for also for school finance. And I'll kind of hit those, and we'll also hit a little bit on that as we walk through the budget as well when we bring up those particular agencies and where we're at. where we are, I should say, not where we're at. Bad grammar. So what's the big picture? The big picture is this budget bill that we're going to walk through today and tomorrow appropriates $2.769 billion of general funds, so 2.76, or rounding up 2.77. That's the bill that went through the Joint Appropriations Committee that we worked on in December and in January, and that you have in front of you now. So our budget is roughly $74 million higher than the governor's budget and the judiciary budget combined. And the reason, the difference is that $74 million is we appropriate roughly $142 million, a little bit more, directly into savings. And so if you took that, if you back that out, our budget is actually $62 million lower than what the governor presented to us in his budget. So just so you know the numbers, and just so what does that mean? What in terms of state employees? The budget has 7,063 state employees in it. So that's how many state employees we're funding through the general fund budget. The governor, in his proposed budget to us, added 75 new employees for full-time employees. The Appropriation Committee added 6 to that, and we'll go through where those 6 are. But it's important to realize that of that 75, 36 of them are with the Veteran Skilled Nursing Center in Buffalo, which means, I mean, that's something we funded. And eventually, that will be self-funding on its own, so that it won't be, we have to front load it, but when it's up and running, it should be self-sustaining, so it won't be a burden to our general fund dollars. There are some various other positions that were basically moved into the category or categorized in the full-time state employees that have been full-time state employees but weren't in the past. Those were at the Game and Fish Department. What the 6 positions that your Appropriations Committee has added is 2 in the Treasurer's Office. And so we've been adding positions to the Treasurer's Office on a fairly regular basis since we modified turned it into the compensation format, and when they've started doing in-house investing. And so what we have to do is we're trying to keep up with the work that they have for their backroom investing and also accounting through all that. You know, we've saved literally $10 or $20 million, sometimes even biannually, by bringing a lot of this in-house in the Treasurer's Office. So we've gone from around roughly 70 to 75 million a biennium, paying for professional fees to various firms around the world who invest for us. We're down around 54 million, and that's to a large degree, that's because we brought a lot of that in-house, and we're doing our own investing on things that we can manage and that we can do. So we added 2 more to the Treasurer's Office. We added 1 position to corrections and 3 temporary positions with the Supreme Court that they asked for that are only for a 3-year period. So what does that mean in terms of our total budget? And that's, so if you go to page 2 of this handout and page 3, you'll see the pie chart of, and so it's important to know because it's a mind-boggling number. But in this budget, even though we only deal with the general fund budget for the most part and education, the total budget for the state of Wyoming for the entire biennium is $9.8 billion. And that number isn't entirely correct because you have to remember that we appropriate, when we save money, we have to appropriate monies into different funds, which means we're not spending money, we're actually saving money, and we're doing different things. So the actual number that we're really appropriating is more like 8.8 billion versus the 9.8. But in terms of, in an accounting process, it's 9.8 million. And that includes general funds, school foundation, federal funds, CapCon, school CapCon, the ARPA dollars that we have for revenue replacement, highway funds, tobacco settlement, LISRA expenditures, water development account, and special revenues, all combined into that number. So Another example is we have to appropriate certain funds for the group health insurance. Well, that's just moving a pot from A to B. Once again, that's how it's 8.8 billion, just as an example. Another example is the Liquor Commission. We have to appropriate $275 million biennially to purchase the alcohol. But then on the back end of that, we receive roughly $26 million a year in income over and above what we pay for it from our sales of alcohol. So we purchase and we take back in. So those are just examples of why it's really only 8.8 billion real dollars. So let's talk about a little bit of historical comparisons between the general fund now and what it's been in the past. Without savings in the ARPA funds, the total appropriation of general funds and reserves in this session, as presented to you, is 2.64 billion. So what that means is that the number that I gave you initially, the 2.7, has ARPA dollars and other components to it. But if you take the pure budget, it's 2.6. If you go back, typically, in the last 10 years, our budget ranged between 3.2 to 3.6 billion. It was at its lowest point was right after when we were here 2 years ago, and our budget was 2.56 billion. But now we brought it back up, and we know mostly what that is. It's the pay raises for state employees and a few things like that that we'll cover as we walk through the budget. But other than that, basically it's a flat budget from 2 years ago. And so what we were hoping to actually kind of shorten the presentations down as we go through it today, in part because we can say, this is the same budget you had 2 years ago. So you've seen it, we presented it to you, we voted on it. And so what we'll emphasize more are the exception requests. And the reason that we're doing it this way is that's the way the chief executive directed his agencies to present their budgets for this future biennium. He told his agencies, I want a flat budget. And then you can come with exception requests, but basically it needs to be a flat budget. And most agencies complied with that. So just some interesting factoids about it. The FTEs from 2019 and 2020, we removed 331 positions during that biennium. If you go back to the 2009-2010 biennium, we are 581 fewer state employees now than we were in 2010. So most of the things that we'll talk about today, the numbers we'll kind of focus on as each person walks through their respective budgets, are the major exception requests. And if you take there were over 400 exception requests. No, I take that back, it's 600 exception requests. If you take 22 of them, that's 90% of all of the costs of these exception requests that we're going to present to you. And most of them are, I think, fairly easy to understand. I'll just run through a few of them as an examples of the high dollar exception requests that we're going to describe to you. Fire suppression account is 20 million. The YCAPS case management system that we've been talking about for years, that's 13 million. We reinstituted part of the block grant that we took away from the University of Wyoming 2 years ago, $7.2 million back into that block grant. There's going to be a floor amendment to do the same thing for the community colleges, just because we missed certain things as we're going through, but it was our intent to do it. We realized we left it out, so that will be coming back into the floor amendment. Staffing the Vezin Nursing Home, that's 5.1 million. We have to front load it again, as I talked about earlier, but then once it's up and running, it will be self-supporting. And we'll see probably one more year's worth of appropriation on that by the time to get it fully operational and running. Department of Revenue Middle Excise Tax System, 3.1 million. Unified Network, 3 million. Wyoming Home Services is 2.7 million. We, in appropriations, did not fund that with ARPA dollars, but I believe there will be amendments bringing that back in. Reorganization of the Energy Authority is $2 million, but that's really just moving money around. Reclassification of certain mental health diseases, that's something that the federal government is clamping down on. That's $1.8 million. And I won't go down the rest of the list, but just generally understanding what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how these numbers are the way they are. So let's talk about the governor's letters a little bit. And his biggest financial request came out of governor's letter number 17. Basically, that asked for an additional $307 million in expenditures. Of that, $100 million is for energy matching grants for large projects. And those large projects are a hydrogen hub for storage, production, and transport, also a CO2 recapture program, a coal refinery research, pyrolysis conversion, that's about an $8 million ask, mass natural gas issues, and wind and solar projects. So the governor came at us and asked us for that. 2 or 3 of these projects are literally on the table and in negotiations with various private entities. And so this particular fund, the $100 million, is kind of what large projects where we're looking for the future. It's a gamble on whether or not we use it or not and how it's going to play out. But it gives the governor the opportunity to go forward and make really kind of revolutionary changes to our tax structure and where the income and jobs and economic development. Then the other thing that we've done is $75 million is a deposit into Wyoming Natural Resource Trust Fund. Basically, that fund was created in order originally to eventually get up to $200 million. Right now, it's sitting right around $125 million. So what this does, it reaches basically the top number that we've been talking about since I've been here for 12 years. Every year, we put a little bit more into it, a little more into it. Now that we have ARPA conserved dollars, we thought this is the perfect opportunity to put it back in there so we no longer will have to fund this Wildlife Trust Fund. Plus, it'll have the added revenues to do more recreational improvements and wildlife habitat improvement for the state going forward. You may recall that we've talked about the Wyoming Innovation Partnership. The governor used $26 million of CARES Act dollars to create the WIP program. Part of it went to UW, part of it went to the community colleges. And the purpose is to reinvigorate retraining for new jobs in the state of Wyoming. In his budget request, the governor asked for an additional $55 million of the conserved ARPA dollars to go into that fund. Your Appropriations Committee cut that in half and made it one time and asked for reports to verify where the money went, what it's doing, some type of metric to measure how it's doing and what it's working, to make sure the program is doing what we intend it to do, and then it's worth funding further. So that's what we did with that project. The other, another big item that we've done is we've taken $10 million of dollars, once again, conserved dollars, and directed that towards wildlife crossings. So there's already $10 million in the wildlife crossing account. So combined, that's a combined total of $20 million in wildlife crossings. And the infrastructure bill that we've all been hearing about allocates $100 million for wildlife crossings, but with a 4-to-1 match. So this $20 million combined will combine with $80 million of federal dollars for our wildlife crossings. So awful good bang for the buck and a great project. We denied $30 million at the request of the governor for outdoor recreation, but we modified it, we reduced it down to $10 million and turned that into ARPA funds to be managed by our state parks. So let's talk a little bit about employee compensation. I think everyone understands that, I believe, but the governor has recommended a $54 million budget to increase for wages across all of the executive department, community colleges, university, and game and fish, and all other federally funded entities. The only group of employees not included in this are the school side, because the school, the model and how we fund that and the ECAs address funding and pay raises in a different fashion. And so this directs to everybody else. Of that, 31 million goes to the executive department. 1.8 will go to the judiciary. 13.6 go to the University of Wyoming, and 7.2 would go to community colleges. We'll talk about the formula, where it goes and how that goes, and I believe there's a few amendments out there to modify it or to add to that you will see when that comes up. One of the major items where we reduce the governor's budgetary request is he asked for 2.56% of replacement cost on major maintenance. It's our position in appropriations that 2% is sufficient to cover that obligation, so that reduced that budget alone by $40 million. Department of Health, our largest agency. The total budget for the Department of Health is $1.93 billion. In 2021, it was $1.87 billion. Your Section 309, we concur with the agent request carrying forward what is out there, which is an $80 million unspent general funds that are sitting there. It's a complicated reason why there can be $80 million sitting out there that are unspent general funds. Representative Larson will kind of walk you through how that worked and why it worked. But in general, a lot of it came from the enhanced federal Medicaid matching from the pandemic dollars. And so that's the primary component of that we'll talk about. We also use, obviously, the expenditures in the Department of Health, and so that's a complicated budget when you look at it. We use it to help do our swapping for our ARPA conserve funds, and that's roughly $83 million on that budget. So, the Board of Tourism. This is going to be interesting when this comes up, folks, because we the Appropriations, both House and Senate, didn't fully understand the budget when it was presented to us. And so, as a consequence, we ended up allowing or approving a $19 million increase in a $22 million budget, so that the total budget now is like $41 billion using the lodging tax. We denied a few things, but literally we came back early last week and looked down and reviewed it and go, what the heck did we do? So you'll see a budget amendment reducing part of that increase for the tourism because we're trying to slow down that train for a couple different reasons. Number one, it's been a crazy 2 years in a lot of different ways, but the idea that we're going to have sustained revenues in the lodging tax of $41 million a biennium is I think, a real unknown. Number two, the projects that were not vetted through transportation. They just came up with it by their board. And so, our belief is that those type of major increases to spending for tourism need to go through the legislative process, be evaluated, and we should have a direct input on those additional dollars and how they're spent. Next, talk a little bit about K-12 operation funding. Most of you know this. The governor recommended the ECA, but only for one time for $37 million. What we did was we recommended $10.2 million, which is just the energy costs and educational supplies. We took that position because it's consistent with the recommendations of our consultants and in compliance with the model, but we did not fund the remaining portions of it. You'll see a couple of different interesting numbers. There's a large swing in the school foundation budget. It went up $95 million in the October CREG, and then in the January CREG, it went down $20 million. And so we'll explain how those numbers go up and down so everyone understand those numbers. And really, even though the numbers go up and down, it doesn't really change the full fiscal profile and that type of thing. But just so we can further understand the numbers and you can understand those numbers. Well, part of that shift cost, though, it's interesting, is because of online education. Prior to the COVID, there was about 1,100 students that were participating online or through virtual schools. 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, there were 5,400 students. And so the funding model pays more for those and how that comes out. This year, there's only 2,500 folks on the virtual schools, but that's also one of the reasons why we've got this pogo stick of changes. Let's talk a little bit about the judiciary, just so you know what's going on with them. $2.9 million in exception requests. We approved all of those particular exception requests. We also provided $440,000 for those 3 temporary staff positions that I talked about. They had $8.2 million in requests for general fund and ARPA dollars in the judicial letter. We denied $6 million of that and approved circuit court e-filing for $2.1 million. And you'll see an amendment adding another $815,000 that we're going to bring back in because of discussions we've had with the court since we took our actions. And that'll be a mirror bill from the 2 appropriations committees. So let's talk a little bit about our revenue outlook. I'm almost done, thank God. So a little bit about our revenue outlook. With the Craig projections, the budget bill, state capital construction bill, and all other bills with appropriations adopted by the Committee of the Whole, we will have permanent savings totaling $220 million. So even though we're increasing the budget on certain items, we're going to have savings of $227 million. What we appropriated $75 million to the Permanent Mental Trust Fund, $75 million to the Common School Account, $75 million to the Natural Resource Fund, and $2.5 million to the Cultural Trust Fund. There will be a sweep of roughly, we believe, at the end of this biennium, meaning in July, of funds sitting there, $320 million that will go into the LSRA. And that's based upon projections from Craig. But what's interesting about that projection is if gas prices stay at close to $90 a barrel, and the natural gas prices remain high as they are now, and coal prices in the next 4 months, and if we have capital gains up to or exceeding 5%, it's very possible we'll have an additional $400 million sweep into the LSRA on July 1 of 2022. And so it's which is really kind of remarkable. And we're going to be somewhere in between the 320 and the added 400. So it's it'll help. I think the balance right now is 1.56. In certain parts of the budget, we appropriate out of the LSRA, and then we flow back in. And so the total amount increase can be anywhere between 200 to 300 million if we have sizable sweeps based upon prices of oil and gas. That same number, that 400 million, will obviously happen again if oil prices remain high next year, flowing back in at the end of 2024. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about FIRE-A, because FIRE-A is on its way. I think we've talked about it before, but FIRE-A it's a closed retirement account. There are roughly 286 participants that are still, the account was closed basically in around 1990, a little bit before that. And so what happened, because it was a closed account, there were no more contributions coming in with existing employees. And so the fund was frozen. And we appropriated back when we froze it roughly $35 million to the account to help cover those folks because the contributions, because it was a closed account. Well, over time, what we found is that actuarially, the retirement folks, and it was more the actuaries at the time, in 2000 and 2001, provided recommendations that it was okay to increase the benefits to the retiree members because the fund could sustain it through the life of the fund. So they increased the contributions, they added spouses and gave 100% contributions. They did 3 or 4 things like that. that had continued on thereafter, and it wasn't modified, and then we had the 2001 crash, we had the 2009 episode. So basically, that fund will be empty by 2026 or 2027, meaning leaving no money left for those 286 folks who are still receiving monthly benefits. And you have to remember that most FIRA folks did not contribute into Social Security, so this is their lifeline, it's their retirement. In 2014, there was a bill to fix this problem. It was roughly a $35 million fix. That bill passed this House, this body, died in the Senate, and so nothing happened. So that was brought to our attention again by retirement and by the good representative from Teton County. The cost to fix it today in the bill that we're presenting is $75 million. And so what we have done is we took part of those ARPA conserved dollars, because now they're in general fund, and allocated those to $55 million that will be the state's contribution, and then we loan $20 million to the districts, which are, I think there are 11 districts spread out around the state, and they'll have to pay back that loan over the course of 20 years at no interest. So the total immediate price tag is roughly $75 million. And so if you'll see in your chart here, there's a list of ARPA dollars direct in the ARPA conserve funds, how much has been allocated and how much has been spent so far. And so if you take that $75 million out of the conserve funds, there was about $128 million after all the actions we've taken so far. That goes down to about $53 million. So let's talk about the ARPA deck a little bit. So House Bill 1, Senate File 66, and Senate File 67, those deal with the ARPA dollars. As you know, there are three types of ARPA. There's ARPA conserve funds. That's $585 million that we were able to offset because of the losses that we could demonstrate to the federal government over the past three fiscal years. Only about 15 so states can do that, and we were fortunate enough that we could take those conserved dollars and swap them out, and we swapped them out with corrections, we swapped them out with Department of Health, and there's a few other places we're trying to do it. But basically, and we do that over the course of 3 years. And so when you look through the budget, you'll see that swap out language, and it's fairly complicated and lengthy. But it allows us to take that $585 million and use it for projects as if it's general fund dollars. And that's basically how we treated it. A little over 20 million of that has already been expended through the actions of the governor before today. There's another 5 or 10 million that are going to happen before we get through this rest of the week. It's a B11 process for certain items that he wants. And by the way, just so you know, when the governor takes these actions, the 20 million, the 5 million that are now sitting B11s, he communicates with your Appropriations Committee and says, this is what I'd like to do. And so we've developed a nice working relationship. It started with the CARES Act, when we gave him the authority, if you recall, to expend up to $50 million of CARES Act dollars after we left at his discretion, but we put kind of sideboards on it. Well, we're doing the same thing with the ARPA dollars as well. So in addition to the conserved dollars, there are ARPA direct dollars. That's roughly $484 million. Of that, most of it has been appropriated in the ARPA bill. And so the ARPA bill, you just heard it a little bit ago, it's come out of the Senate over to here and was introduced. And so that should be, if you want to see what the Senate did, and if you have amendments to address or add to or subtract from the ARPA dollars and want to use it for something, I would suggest that you look at how much is expended and what it's being used for. And it's important to understand what uses you can use the ARPA direct dollars for. There's only 6 types of things that you can use ARPA direct for. And it's listed on the handout, and so you can just go through it, but it's just important to know the differences. The categories are public health, negative economic impacts due to COVID, services to disproportionate impacted communities, premium pay, infrastructure, but it's a very limited infrastructure to water, sewer, and broadband, and administration. So if it's not one of those items, you can't use ARPA Direct for it. And once again, that's Senate File 67 and House Bill 6 that address those numbers. Right now, if you take all the bills that are out there, roughly there's only about 60 million of that remaining, depending on the actions of the bodies, if everything that's out there is adopted. Then there's the last one is the Section 604, that's the 109 million, which also has specific uses, which are broadband, library, connectivity, and multi-purpose facilities. It's a different process with those dollars. You have to submit an application in order to qualify for it. It's just reviewed by the feds, and they approve your application. And if you have applications for more than the 109 million, then the way the law is written, they get it, or the federal government gets to decide which ones to approve. And so our plan has always been, we don't want to submit anything more than the 109 million, so we get what we want. And of that, so far, your Appropriations Committee has only touched about 12 million for a community college program, a new building up in the northwest corner of the state. The governor has expressed interest, obviously, in as much broadband as possible and allocating some to libraries. Okay, a little bit. I just want to talk a little bit on a couple global motions. So as we go through this, you'll understand what we're talking about. This is for the markup. So as you recall, human services consolidation across all of state agencies. So when each of us are describing actions taken by one or particular agency, we'll just say HR consolidation. We won't go into the details, and you'll see it on the summary sheet, because it's basically a revenue neutral at this point. This came from the efficiency study. The theory is it's going to save us some money down the road, although we haven't seen any of that yet, but we're still in the process of getting it done. So whenever you see that HR consolidation, you know what it is. And so we'll kind of skip over it once we get going, just because I don't want to take too much time up in doing it. There was a reorganization of the Department of Corrections, so that's a long, lengthy process in the bill. Their budget is 400 plus pages. What I would say, what's interesting, in addition to just being 400 pages, the new director Director Shannon, basically his budget is $25 million less than the budget in 2020. That's part of his reorganization. He just came in and did some amazing things and saved the state ongoing $25 million a biennium in how he's operating that agency. So just kind of a little tidbit on the nice job he's doing. On IT requests, other than the major costs like the RIS, a few other things, we'll kind of just deal with that superficially. We won't spend much time on it. We require every agency to bring an exception request for all IT requests. And so every time they get a new computer system, a new copier, new software, it has to come in front of us and we review it. Why do we do that? Because we spend $300 or $400 million a biennium on IT. And so we want to get a handle on it and understand it and do what we can. And we're working with ETS to try to do cost savings any way we can, but also make sure we're not asking for something we don't need. So that, I think, in a nutshell, is all I've got to say. You're so lucky. And with that, I'd be happy, before we get started, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And then I'll come back up and we'll start walking through the governor's office.
I'm not seeing, oh, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chairman, excuse me, let me rephrase that. So I appreciate the overview. It's my understanding that the proposal from the executive is only going to get us relative to market in terms of compensation up to somewhere in the neighborhood of 2020, a couple of years ago. So my question is, given all of the millions of dollars that we have here to consider, And the priority, in my view, is people before non-human things. Is there room in what's left over after all the good work of the joint committees in appropriation for consideration of an amendment relative to the governor's recommendation?
Chairman Nicholas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, that's a political question. That's something that, that we'll have to debate. But as we debate that, I think it's important, if you go to the charts, you can see what our spending, our income versus our spending, and where they end up. And on the general fund side, we're still in the negative. We're inching up towards a balanced budget. That's the red line on top. But if you follow the green line, it's the picture sounds rosy today, but everyone remember where we were 2 years ago, where we cut 335 positions. And we reduced our general fund budget by almost $500 million. And think about where these extra dollars, if they are extra dollars, are going to go. Because, you know, we talked about what the balance of the LISRA is, because that's an important component of our, it's our immediate savings account, but we also have lots of it committed. If everything goes well, we will still be under $2 billion, which has always been kind of the target balance of the LISRA at the end of 2024, even with the rosy projections, with the best case scenarios that I talked about earlier. And so the answer is, can we afford it? We can always afford it, but there's always a trade-off. For whatever you pay for, you got to take money from someplace else. That's one of the reasons why we put money in savings, because when we have the opportunity, we want to put money back into the Permanent Mental Trust Fund and the common schools so that we know that we'll have tough times again. I mean, it could happen a month from now. We could, you know, if interest rates continue to soar, housing market craters, prices keep going up, our stock market could take a 20 to 30% correction like that. And it could be years to recover. We don't know those things. That's why we save, and that's why we act conservatively as best we can.
Chairman Flitner.
Madam Chairman, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, just because I don't understand the nuances of these retirement funds, but with regard to Fire A, you mentioned that it was closed in 1990 and no more contributions were made to the fund. Could you explain to me why that occurred and then why that sets us up to be here at this point in time?
Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was closed in the sense that no new members came into it. There were still folks that were contributing to it until they retired. I think the last person retired out of that, meaning he went to work well before 1990, like a year ago. So the last real contribution out of someone's pocket was about a year ago. But because you're not having more people join it, it was no longer self-sustaining. And as soon as you closed it, it was spending more money than it took in. So it was on a decline. The reason that we did it was because the that was originally the account for all firemen, but it was economically, it was unsustainable. In other words, they didn't pay enough money in for the benefits. So they closed Fire A and they started Fire B. But Fire B, you contribute less, but the benefits are not near as good as the ones in Fire A. And that was just a political decision that the legislature made back, I think it was around 1990. I hope that answers your question. So.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you, Madam Chairman, for the excellent information relative to my former question. My follow-up, just real quickly, regarding the executive's proposal to, address, the critical cost of living issue facing all of us. We have a 40-year high in inflation. Could you say a bit more to explain and understand, so we have something to help inform our constituents, if you will, as to why, the perception is we have these hundreds of millions of dollars coming in, and we're not able to grant or consider favorably a $2.6 million proposal from the executive.
Representative Larson?
So as we, the good representative really gets to the crutch of some of the conversation that we had to have over the course of our deliberations with the budget. We've got billions of dollars that are coming in that are one-time dollars. With this $1.x billion of ARPA dollars that came in, we converted some of them to general fund. Wonderful to have one time. And so that's kind of why we bring up this discussion on Fireman A, because as we visited with leadership, visited with you, we says, what are some things that we can really take care of one time this session through these conserved general funds or at the ARPA Direct? It's kind of like getting an inheritance from the wealthy aunt that passed away, and you've got some decisions to make. Do we go fishing in Alaska, or do we replace the sewer that's been plugging up every Thanksgiving Day? And so as we looked at some of this, we said, we need to take care of some of these things that have been hanging out there for a long time. This Fireman A kind of stinks, but we need to get it taken care of. And so we do that with some of these one-time dollars. Then we've had to come back and say, our position, set aside this one-time money, and our position on our long-term forecast, our revenue forecast, has certainly improved from last year, but still less than in 2019. And so as we address some of those issues like employment compensation and things of that nature, and restoring, as we get into the budget, restoring some of the programs in the Department of Health and other places, we have to say, what's the sustainability, even though our revenue picture is improved, what's the sustainability of that moving forward? And so those are the conversations we've had to get us to this point. I think that there will be some interesting conversations on the floor as we move forward, but I hope you kind of understand. We kind of looked at the one-time funds, and then we had to have us kind of put another set of glasses on as we looked at our ongoing funding of our agencies.
Representative Yin?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Question of how does the Appropriations Committee determine what is the appropriate amount to keep in the LISRA versus a different level? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know that the Appropriations Committee really determined what the appropriate amount was to leave an LSRA. There was a desire to see some of that grow, knowing that the LSRA is the state's rainy day account. And after the downturn we saw over the last couple of years, making sure there was sufficient amounts of money in that account was just kind of a goal. There was no set amount that was desired. As the good chairman mentioned earlier in his presentation, when the LSRA was first created many, many years ago, long before most of the members in this chamber were in this chamber, there was a vision of if it could reach $2 billion, how great that would be, because that would be about a little over half of a biennial budget. And so that was a vision maybe 15 years ago when that was created. I wouldn't say it was set in stone by any stretch. It was just sort of a vision at that time. So the Appropriations Committee really didn't set a number. We just simply said, let's try and make sure we've set aside enough money so that if we do see another downturn, as we have seen two since 2016, that there would be funds available to sustain our government and to keep it from being the roller coaster ride that we've experienced over the years.
Representative Larson?
And I'd add to the good representative a little further discussion. Appropriations, all-knowing and all well-intended, were pure as the wind-driven snow and soft as a fluffy rabbit, you all know. And so we got looking at all of this one-time money and the ongoing money, as we just mentioned about, and we really thought that savings was good. Putting this money in the Wildlife Trust Fund we thought was good. Put money into the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund is good. Putting money into schools is good. Building the LSRA up to maybe in the end of the biennium coming out at 1.9, that's good. And so we've done all of that. And when we completed that exercise, we'd spent all the money. We hadn't left you anything. And we had to back up and reevaluate our position and say, time out here, because we know that there are a lot of good ideas that come from the body of both sides of this. And we backed out. And so that's why we come back and from the 450 million that we put in permanent savings, we reduced that down to 2. And then the tip that you see really going to the LSRA will depend on how much we spend of our general funds. The good chairman noted that we're going to see about a $200 million tip this year, but that's really going to depend on what you guys do in the course of this deliberation.
Representative Stith.
Madam Chairman, and to add on to, for the representative from District 16, coincidentally, if you look on page 3 of the goldenrod, line 51, you'll see that the projected LSRA balance as of June 30th, 2024 would be 1.655 billion. And coincidentally, the actual LSRA balance as of June 30th of 2021 was about 1.6 billion. So there's no particular magic to it, but basically after all the dust settles, the LSRA comes back to, on a projected basis at least, about the same balance as it was last June. Whether you want that to be higher or lower is for you all to decide.
Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a point of clarification, when the chairman was giving the overview, I wasn't real sure. There was 75 million going to the Natural Resource Trust Fund, but then I kind of understood that that was wildlife. Is there a difference, or was that just, thank you.
Representative Larson.
Thank you. So we put 75 million in the Wildlife Trust Fund, and then we put 2.5 million in the Cultural Trust Fund. Those will be the 2 trust funds that we put that are aside from the school and the PMTF that we put money into. I hope that answered your question.
Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In response to the representative's question, I believe also the good chairman mentioned that there would be 10 million going in to wildlife crossings, which might be what you were thinking of, in addition to the 75 million going into the corpus of the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund. I hope.
Representative Romero Martinez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question: there's a lot of funds we just discussed. My question is specific to, I mean, not to wildlife, but I see the wildlife portion. Are dollars that were earmarked for human beings, which came through Part 1 of CARES Act and the recycle through the emergency FEMA and come back where we're at today through a well-intentioned but clunky rollout of assistance for human beings, is there still going to be access to those dollars, or are they just going to be not accessible? Thank you.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee did restore some of the reductions in Department of Health and Department of Family Services where those reductions had gone too far and were affecting our constituents out around the state. And so some of those reductions were restored. Others were not restored from the simple point of thought that we could not sustain bringing all of the reductions back into the budget. So where the reductions were most harmful to our constituents, those were brought back in and fully refunded, or the others were not. So it's really a matter of what can be sustained in an ongoing budget versus what can be afforded in one-time dollars. And so that's why some of the money goes to savings, is because it's one-time dollars. And that way those savings accounts then create revenue for future generations and future uses. And that is the overall principle was we kind of went with about a third philosophy. Didn't really pan out to be exactly that, but a third of it was long-term savings, a third of it was medium to short-term uses, and a third of it for really immediate uses. And so as you look at that overall budget surplus through the federal dollars and through improved revenues picture, that was kind of the general approach we took. Like I said, mathematically, it's not quite that, but if you think of it in that picture, that will help to better understand how we approached it.
Any more questions? Representative Newsom.
Thank you. I just had a question on the decrease in the tourism budget and what that was based on, and if you looked at the plan and found that there were unacceptable items on that plan, or we enacted the tax so that we would be competitive with our surrounding states, and if you take money out of that budget, we'll be in the same place we were, not being competitive with our surrounding states.
Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we'll address that in more detail when we get to the budget and when you see the amendment. But the answer is we are trying not to be judgmental on the recommendations and where the Tourism Board wants to spend the additional lodging tax dollars. I know that a lot of us on appropriations are of the belief that every lodging tax dollar doesn't necessarily need to be appropriated for specific requests out of the Tourism Board, particularly when their budget essentially can double in the course of 1 year or 18 months of collections, and that it's the legislature's job to evaluate the programs and the travel folks to sit down and explain what is the best use of those funds. I mean, they did a lot of work. They came up with some wonderful ideas, and our issue is those need to be vetted through the legislature before we go out and fund all the programs that they would like to use those extra revenues for.
Anyone else? All right, Chairman Nicholas.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and I would so I bring you Agency 1.
Hold on, Chairman Nicholas. Can you approach, please?
So because we've only got 5 minutes left, we've been suggested that perhaps we'll start Agency 1 at 2 o'clock. So lucky me. Again.
Committee announcements. Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Madam Chairman, I move that the Committee of the Whole beg leave and rise and sit again at 2 p.m.
All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Nay or no? All right. Committee announcements. Representative Paxton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Your Committee number 4, Education, will not meet upon noon recess.
Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Your Committee number 8, Transportation, will meet 15 minutes after noon adjournment tomorrow, Tuesday, whatever Tuesday's date is, to consider 3 bills: House Bill 18, Off-Road Recreation Vehicle Registration; House Bill 81, Operation Motor Vehicle or Motorcycles by Disabled Persons; and House Bill 82, Military Discharge and Benefits.
Okay, any more committees? Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In addition to the I believe we have several that might be on adjournment, but tomorrow at 8, at 8:30, we'll review Senate File 239, 66, and 67. Let me get the list for. Today in Appropriations on adjournment, House Bill 107, 146, and 147. And any re-referrals.
Any further committees? Vice Chair Air, maybe? Corporations?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm not sure which bills we'll be discussing, but your House Committee number 7, Corporations, will meet 15 minutes after noon recess. And E005 to consider, looks like we have 5 bills on the agenda if we get to them all. HB 76, HB 56, HB 60, 142, and 152.
Okay, House stands in recess till 2 p.m.